Now, new details on a drama so intense, Russian President Vladimir Putin took time away from the Olympics to discuss it with President Obama. A high-stakes conflict just 300 miles from Sochi in Ukraine, where the parliament just voted to strip the president of his powers after a peace pact ended days of violence. It's a tug-of-war between Vladimir Putin and the West, so critical because of Ukraine's key location. Take a look. It's a country torn between East and West, with opposition protesters looking towards the values of Europe on one side, while supporters of the Ukrainian president point to Putin's Russia. ABC's Hamish Macdonald is on the ground in Ukraine's capital and joins us now with the very latest. Hamish?
Martha, the ousted president, Viktor Yanukovych, is calling this whole process a coup, and then just hours later was prevented from leaving the country on a helicopter. Take a look at these pictures. They're being broadcast on local independent television. They claim it is security footage of him trying to escape, but they can't independently verify that it is in fact him. In the meantime, the parliament is trying to assert its own authority, appointing an acting president, the Speaker of the Parliament, as well as that, releasing the arch-rival of Yanukovych, Yulia Tymoshenko, the former Prime Minister. She's been in prison. She has back problems now and is in a wheelchair. As a power vacuum opens up, the sworn rival, Yulia Tymoshenko, enters centre stage. She began the day a prisoner and ends it a key player in this country's future. Tymoshenko is not universally admired here, but they shout approval when she vows justice for the ousted president. A swift session of Parliament agreed to release the former Prime Minister, leaving her daughter in tears. They voted too to impeach the president and hold fresh elections in May. Outside, protesters are in control, guarding all key government buildings and roaming the abandoned presidential retreat. It's thought to have cost some $500 million.
I can't believe that such place can exist in Ukraine.
The average person here earns less than $15 a day, and the country has huge debts. So this zoo, the cars, are unthinkable. They now hope the next leaders will be more honest.
They may be more intellectual. It's very easy to be more intellectual than Yanukovych, yes, but
are they corrupt? Are they clean?
We don't have clean politicians, especially in the parliament.
Andrei Kurkov is Ukraine's best-loved author. He's already writing about this latest bloody chapter in the country's history.
Why was it worth killing people to keep power?
It means he didn't consider people in the streets his people. They were the enemies.
There is much at stake here for world powers. These past weeks should have been Vladimir Putin's finest hour. Instead, on his own doorstep, protests gave way to running gun battles.
How much is this about Russian influence versus Western influence?
Now it is very much. Putin's so-called Russian world will not exist without Ukraine. Ukraine, I mean, Kiev is the first capital of ancient Russia.
So how disappointing is this for Vladimir Putin?
I think, I mean, if I was him, I would drink all night.
Toppling Lenin statues are evidence of long-held desire for distance from Moscow's influence. But in the Russian-speaking East, those bonds remain tight. In this deeply divided nation, the biggest challenge may just be remaining united. Martha, quite apart from who wins the battle for international influence here, whoever emerges as the next leader has the challenge of trying to keep this country united, prevent it splintering into two, possibly three different countries. And perhaps crucial to doing that will be dealing with immediately the debt crisis that Ukraine is now in.
Thanks so much, Hamish. Let's dig into this now with our experts. Tom Friedman is a foreign affairs columnist for the New York Times and author of From Beirut to Jerusalem. And we also welcome back our ABC News contributor, Bill Kristol, who is also editor of the Weekly Standard. Welcome, gentlemen. And Tom Friedman, I want to start with you. You have Ukraine's president who has virtually vanished. He's now trying to rally his supporters. However, new elections, protesters feeling they have a victory. What happens next in this country with no money and no unity?
Well, I think the good news, Martha, is the fact that this happened from the bottom up. The West didn't do this, the United States didn't do this, the EU didn't do this, Ukrainian people did this. That's, I think, very, very important to remember. But what do we learn from experiences like Egypt, for instance, where we also saw a bottom-up ousting of a long-time dictator? What we learned,
seems similar to Egypt.
Right, it does at many levels, a failing state. But also, what we learned from Egypt is it's not about the morning after, it's all about the morning after the morning after. The morning after, everyone celebrates getting rid of the leader everyone hated. But what you discovered in Egypt was actually there was a huge diversity of opinion of where to go next, what they wanted to be free to do. And I think we're going to face the same challenge here in Ukraine. The second big challenge is this, like Egypt, is an economically desperate state. And when you win Ukraine, you win a bill.
Bill Kristol, bottom up, is that a good path? What happens now in your eye?
Look, 10 years ago, there was the Orange Revolution in Ukraine. I mean, it was the first color revolution. It inspired other efforts around the world, in Lebanon, and ultimately perhaps even in Tehran and Damascus. So all honor to the people of Ukraine for having that first revolution unfortunately slipped away. I think that's partly our fault, incidentally, and the West Europeans' fault. We didn't do as much as we could have to help the newly democratic Ukraine. It was very corrupt. The oligarchs facilitated the corruption. Putin did not help at all. And so we ended up where we were. And now the people of Ukraine have done it again. And now I do think it's bottom up, which is great. I totally agree with Tom on this. George Washington, whose birthday it was yesterday, said, "Liberty, when it begins to take root, is a plant of rapid growth." And I think liberty is a plant of stronger growth than people sometimes like us in the West think. You know, once that spark is there, people remember it and they want it back, but we now need to help them.
We can't avoid Russia's role here, as you mentioned. What Russia does next is so key. Here is what President Obama said about that this week.
Our approach as the United States is not to see these as some Cold War chessboard in which we're in competition with Russia. Our goal is to make sure that the people of Ukraine are able to make decisions for themselves about their future.
Of course, Yanukovych was democratically elected, but is this a new version of a kind of a Cold War here? Well,
I don't think this is the Cold War, Martha. The Cold War is a very specific thing, two nuclear armed powers and competing ideologies truly playing on a global chessboard. I would argue the world is really divided up into three kinds of states right now. My co-author, Michael Mandelbaum, and I've been talking about this. One is countries that are focused on having a powerful state. That's Russia. And if you got oil, that's Iran, that's North Korea. If you got nukes, you can just focus on having a powerful state and playing your geopolitical games in your neighborhood. Second are states focused on having a prosperous people. That's the European Union. That's the world that many Ukrainians want to join, clearly. And third are states who are fighting over something very primal. Who are we? What are we? That's Syria. Who owns which olive tree? And in many ways, Ukraine is all three. You have, part of it, Russia competing for wanting to pull it into its powerful state sphere, funded by oil. You have Ukrainians wanting to be part of the world of globalization, the IT revolution, economic growth and opportunity. And you have a state that still isn't sure about its identity in a post-Soviet, post-Cold War world.
But Russia is in danger of losing a key ally here. Is there any danger that Russia does intervene, that they might even send in troops as they did in Georgia?
Well, they certainly have intervened in all kinds of ways in Ukraine in the last few months and years, but they could do even more so. Look, it's nice for President Obama to say it's not a Cold War chessboard. I don't know why he says that with some disdain. That was not an ignoble thing for us to play on that chessboard for 45 years. We ended up winning that Cold War. And I do think Putin thinks he's playing chess. He thinks he's playing even a rougher game than chess, and we have to be able to match it. We could say, all honor to the people of Ukraine for beginning this process, but if we are not we and the Europeans cannot make ourselves as strong a force for democracy and the rule of law in Ukraine as Putin is for the opposite, then things may not go well.
I want to move to Syria. You mentioned Syria. The UN Security Council voted to boost aid to Syria this weekend, but that conflict grinds on. There's been talk about perhaps new options in Syria. Is there anything more that can be done here, Tom Friedman?
Well, clearly, if we can identify people who truly share our values of wanting to see a pluralistic, consensually political Syria, I think we should arm and support them. And it seems to me the administration is doing that. But You know, I'd ask you, Martha, can you name the head of the Syrian opposition?
I knew you were going to ask me that.
Right.
Can anyone?
Yeah, I mean, and you know,
I can name several.
And what their agenda is. And this is I actually can't, and that's really one of the problems that I think a lot of people in Syria. You know, sometimes the news is in the noise and sometimes the news is in the silence. And the fact that so many people are still clinging to Assad has to do with the fact that they do not see an opposition right now that has the will, ability, and maybe even the ideology to build a pluralistic Syria on the ground that, say, the Christians who are still clinging to Assad and the Alawites, you know, would feel confidence in. So, you know, I want to come back to Ukraine just for a second and to another similar revolution, Tunisia. Why is it that the Arab state that's done the best is the one we had the least to do with? Because the people took it and they owned it. And if we see that in Syria, man, I'm all for supporting it. But it's got to start with them. The Middle East only puts a smile on your face when it starts with them.
Iran did not intervene in Tunisia, and you need to support your friends when your enemies are being supported by outside powers, which I think is the case in both Ukraine and Syria. Syria was also a bottom-up revolution, a peaceful revolution, a pro-Western revolution to an amazing degree back in 2011, and we did nothing.
So Bill Kristol, step back for a moment here quickly and look at what Barack Obama's foreign policy legacy is up to this point with Syria, with Ukraine, with Libya, with Iraq, with Afghanistan.
With Iran. People around the world, I think, want liberty to an amazing degree. We have done very little to help them.
Okay. Thanks to both of you.